So next up we have Aditya. Aditya Godbole, he's a software architect. He's meddling in software for last 13 years. He has worked on everything like mainframes, embedded devices, kernel programming, machine vision, desktop apps, and the cloud also. So that's great. So he believes that computing, that anything, sorry, not computing. So he wrote this, so I'm not sure I'm able to understand what he wrote. So he believes that anything you can learn from life, a game of football can also teach you in 90 minutes. So a big round of applause for Aditya Godbole.
Am I audible? Okay, cool, thanks. Just give me a second here. All right. So you guys are in for another dense talk. So this is about basically a new way of sort of looking at object-oriented programming. There's a lot to cover, so I'm going to go pretty fast. Even if you don't get the finer details, that's okay. Just make sure that you get the gist of it. And please hold your questions till the end because I'm not sure that I can make it in time, basically. All right, so let's start. So let's start with a set of definitions first. Let's get them out of the way. So when I say type, I basically mean a set of methods. And as a set, think set theory. So a literal set of methods. That's what I mean by a type, and that's all that a type is. When I say a subtype of a type T, it is basically a superset of the methods of the type T. All right, so a subtype is a superset of the type, of the methods. Okay. When I say a class, it means an implementation of the type, okay, along with the properties of the implementing object. So the actual type and the implementation along with the properties of the object are bundled together. And that's what a class is. And that's what we have all been brought upon. And that's been the most prominent object-oriented paradigm so far. What we want to focus right now is on maintainability, okay? One of the main pillars of maintainability is reuse, okay? We all have heard about the DRY principle, right? Dry principle. I've even heard that some companies have dry days to keep their code sane. But maintainability, I mean, when we talk of reuse of what exactly are we talking about? So this is one of my favorite quotes. Basically, it's from V for Vendetta, and it says, who is the form following the function of what? And what I am is a man in a mask. This captures the essence of object-oriented programming, right? Objects are recognized by what they do and not by what they are. So if I have to explain object-oriented programming in one sentence, it will be form follows function, okay? Which essentially, in simple word, means behavior and not data. That is what object-oriented programming is all about. So when I say reuse, I'm going to talk of reuse of behavior, okay? Another pillar, really, of good maintainable code is typing and subtyping, right? As Rubists, we kind of tend to ignore this, but as your code bases get large, you no longer find that person who knows that the duck is supposed to walk and it's supposed to quack. So you no longer know that it is actually a duck. And what you need really is a formal definition of what the duck is. And that really is all what typing and subtyping is about, okay? So I'm going to define two axes of maintainability here. The first is the DRY axis, which you're all familiar with, and I'm going to introduce a new one, which is called the don't shoot yourself, or the DSY axis, right? So when we are talking about reuse of behavior and subtyping as the axis, how effective your code base is along these two axes really depends on one central property of both of these, and that is the granularity, right? The smaller your units of behavior are, the more flexible you are so that you can compose them. Similarly, the smaller your types are, you can easily bring them together. So it's a bit like Lego, right? If you run out of larger pieces, it's okay, even if you have the smaller pieces, because you can always combine the smaller pieces to make the larger ones. So if you have your units really small, then you can combine them to make larger ones. But there's a big assumption here. And the assumption is that the language or framework that you're using allows you to combine such small units without a lot of overhead. So which brings us to the idea of composability. Now, when we are talking of behavior, composability of behavior basically means the ability to inject in different units of behavior at will without really having to worry about where in some tree hierarchy that they lie, okay? When we are talking of types, it is the ability to combine multiple types together to form a composite type. Now, when we look at classes, which is the paradigm that all of us have been sort of brought upon on, reuse and subtyping, both are possible only through multiple inheritance. I know some people say that multiple inheritance is bad, and for particular reasons it is bad. But the reality is that if you want to model a real-world complex scenario, then you cannot get away from multiple inheritance. The problem is that a lot of languages now don't support multiple inheritance because it's bad, and there have been entire sections of books and articles on the web dedicated to why multiple inheritance is bad and what the problems are. So it must be true. But if you actually distill all that material down to why multiple inheritance is bad, it boils down to one thing, and that is when you are trying to refactor, if you have a class hierarchy, it basically means that you have to modify your class hierarchy very frequently. And in traditional languages, modification of a class hierarchy is a very expensive operation. And especially if you are following agile methodologies where you're creating new classes or you're refactoring at will, then it really becomes a hindrance. So when people say that multiple inheritance is bad, what it really means is that it is just really expensive. So in the older models where you had a waterfall development model where you had your requirements frozen, you could go ahead and model your entire universe using inheritance and multiple inheritance, and it would kind of work. But in agile world, it's quite restrictive. So some languages introduced this concept of interfaces, right? So what are interfaces? Basically, an interface is a set of method definitions, which means that it is basically a type definition, if you go by the definition of type that I spoke of earlier. The second important property of interfaces is that they are composable, which means that you can combine multiple interfaces into a single interface. So let's take a language like Java, which introduced interfaces in addition to classes. And so I would put it right at the bottom right in this chart. Where does Ruby lie? So Ruby has mixins and modules, which are more flexible than sort of the rigid class-based inheritance model. But we really don't do ourselves a favor by ignoring the type safety of it. So I would put Ruby over here. Now, can we do anything to actually move Ruby further along? Which means that can we introduce interfaces in Ruby, right? So this is where the gem that I've written comes. So it's actually a gem that I've modified. I've made a lot of backward incompatible modifications from the original, but you can get it from, you can just install RubyCube gem and require cube. The name cube comes from composable units of behavior. So let's see what you can do with it. Is this kind of visible on the screens? Or readable? Okay. So I'm defining an adder, which is an interface. All right. It contains one method called sum, and I'm even giving sort of the type prototype of it. So I'm saying sum is a method which takes one argument, which is an array of integers, and it returns an integer. All right, so anyone who's worked in typed languages, this should be pretty obvious. Calculator is another interface which extends adder, which means that calculator also now has the prototype for sum. It also defines two more, which is fact, which takes an integer and returns an integer. The next one is a bit interesting. It's position, which takes an array of integers, another integer, and returns what we call is a union type of integer and nil class, which means that the position or pos method must return either integer or nil, right? As long as it is one of these, it's fine. Anything else is not fine. So if you return a set, it's basically a union type. Now I'm going to define a class which defines these three methods that were specified in the calculator interface: fact, sum, and position. Nothing great about here. Just observe that the position method is using the index method, which can return nil if the element is not found, which is why it matches. So if the element is not found, it's going to return nil, or it is going to return an integer. You can check for the implementation by, there are two ways. One is you can say mark interface. What this does is, so the first way is a bit intrusive. It is going to change your original class a bit. The second way is non-intrusive. It's basically going to create a new class which is guaranteed to implement that interface. So depending on your choice, you can use both. Are you guys with me so far? All right, cool. So with interfaces now, we have Ruby right up here, but can we move it further along? Can we get Ruby over here? Which means to get Ruby up here, we need something which is slightly better than mixins or modules. So what is the problem with mixins and modules? The main problem is conflict. If you have two modules and they have the same method and you include both of them, basically you're dependent on the order of inclusion. Also, there is no warning or there's nothing to aid, no aid for you which tells that you have a conflict, right? So this problem was kind of solved and presented in a paper in 2002 called Traits, Composable Units of Behavior. The idea of a trait is very simple. It's basically a module, and it implements a few methods. So in the T-circle trait over there, the rectangle on the left is the methods that are implemented. So that is the interface that the trait provides. On the right is what we call a required interface, which means that if a class A wants to include a trait T, the class A must satisfy the required interface if it must include the trait T. So we have a very good example of this in the Ruby standard library. This is from the documentation of enumerable, and it says that you can use the enumerable module, basically, if your class defines the each method. Furthermore, if you want min, max, and sort, then your class must define the spaceship operator as well, right? So this is nothing but the required interface. What this is saying is that the required interface for the enumerable module is each and the spaceship operator. But this is in code. We can do better, and we can actually enforce it. So this is the original interface definition that we saw earlier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to define a new interface, which is advanced calculator, which it further extends the calculator interface. So the calculator is going to give you sum, position, and fact. In addition to that, I'm going to define product and average. I'm going to define a new trait called product calc T, which implements or provides me the product method. Also notice that I've specified that it requires the adder interface, because if you see the definition of the product method, it uses a method called sum, which means that it relies on the including class to have the sum method. And if you go back, the adder interface is nothing but a specification of the sum method. So I'm saying that the product calc T trait requires the adder interface. I have another trait defined, which has the average method, but notice that it also has a product method in it. So what we really want to do is we want an implementation of the advanced calculator so we want to start from our original simple calc, which gives me the 3 methods defined in the calculator, the position, sum, and fact. I want to inject the product calc t into it so that I get the product method from it. And I want to inject the stats calc t into it so that I get the average. But I do not want the product method from stats calc t in it. Right? Here you see is an example of a conflict. Both traits define the product. I want only the product from the product calc t and not the stats calc t. So if I have to represent it diagrammatically, it basically is I want to take the simple calc implementation. Into it, I want to inject the product calc t. Into that, I want to inject the stats calc t, but without the product method. Okay? And I want to pass this through a check of advanced calculator. Okay? So how can we do that? This is basically the code for doing that. What we are saying is that we start with the simple calc, which is a class which has the first 3 methods. Into that, I'm going to inject the trait product calc t. Into that, I'm going to inject the trait stats calc t. But while injecting it, I want to suppress the product method. Okay? And then I'm going to check it with an interface for the advanced calculator. Now, a few things happen when you do this. First is, whenever you mix in any trait, the with trait method is actually going to check whether there are any conflicts. And the way to resolve conflicts is by using the suppress. When you use the as interface method, it checks whether all the methods that are required by that interface are actually implemented by whatever comes earlier, by whatever you're calling the as interface on. Now, there are 2 aspects to checking of these signatures. The first is checking whether the methods exist and checking the arity of the methods, which means whether the number of parameters match. So both these things happen when the as interface method is called. So these are happening at sort of class definition time, so to say. There's another aspect of it, which is actually checking whether the parameters that are passed, like integer or array of integers or the union type, whether those match. Now, those need to happen at runtime, right? And they do happen at runtime. But remember that when you're doing type checking in a language like Ruby at runtime, there is some overhead involved. So the runtime type checking in the kubegem is opt-in. You have to specifically say that you want to enable runtime type checks. When I've measured it on my machine, for one method, the approximate time, so like for 1 million method calls, the approximate time overhead is about 1 second. So you can take it to be about a microsecond per method call. That's the kind of overhead you get. If you don't want it in production, switch it off. There's a global environment variable that you can set to enable it in, say, your testing environments or even when you're developing it. Right? Another way of doing the same thing is maybe you don't want to suppress it completely. You want to rename it so that you can use it sometime later. This is also allowed. By the way, both these methods are formally specified and defined in the traits paper. So this is nothing new that I've invented. I've just gone ahead and implemented what's given in the traits paper. So a few tips when you want to start thinking and using traits to compose your classes. Now, remember one thing. All this is sort of a different way of looking at defining your classes to begin with. All right? We are not talking about typecasting objects. We are still dealing at the class level. So this is defining your classes. Okay? So some tips to think along, or if you want to follow this approach. First, you start with structural classes. Now, structural classes are entities. It's like your domain models. They enforce the integrity of the entity that you're trying to represent. Like maybe you're doing some validations in there. You have a bunch of setters and gethers which make sure that whatever is being set is correct. Maybe you do a few internal calculations when you are setting or getting it, that kind of stuff. But not really business logic, right? Just enforcing the properties of the entity. Then what you do is try and identify the interactions in your system. For example, if you're moving a duck on a canvas, that interaction just needs the walk method, right? So you create an interface which has just the walk method and maybe call it walker, okay? Then, and you basically define a bunch of such interfaces. Then you go and implement traits which satisfy these interfaces. Now remember that the traits can be smaller than the interfaces in the signature, but never larger. Of course, if you have smaller traits, you can always combine them. It might happen that your structural classes do not always satisfy the required interface that is specified by a trait, right? In that case, it can, but it doesn't, because maybe you have not written that class. So in that case, what you do is you inherit from that class, implement those glue methods that are required to satisfy the required interface, and then you can go ahead. So that is basically how you can approach modeling using traits and interfaces. A note about writing specs, or specifically R specs. Whenever you want to spec out your trait, it's always advisable to use the RSpec shared examples facility to write specs. Just like you can compose different traits together, you can compose your specs with shared examples together using the it behaves like from the RSpec. So I would recommend that. Incidentally, the facility or the requirements of traits as mentioned by the traits paper is not something unique to this gem. If you know your other languages well, then Java 8 after Java 8 Plus also allows you to think in terms of traits, especially with its default interface methods. You can achieve the same thing. And Go also allows you to do the same thing. The way in which you do both in both these languages is slightly different, but basically you can do that. And those are like individual talks of their own. So essentially, with the traits approach, if you get down to it, then you can be pretty high up on both the don't repeat yourself and don't shoot yourself axis, and hopefully make your lives a bit better. So that's pretty much what I had. The code is here. Go and install it, and please go and read the traits paper. It's a really nice paper to read. Thank you. I have 3 minutes for questions, if there are any.
Do we have any questions?
No. There's one there.
So, one of the elements that I was thinking of when listening to this talk, so one of the problems is that I understand the idea that you can compose different sort of behaviors, but let's say let's say I'm writing something that is supposed to serialize and deserialize, okay? But there are properties. Let's say it's an XML and JSON. There is a structure or a constructor required to construct the sort of object this thing is going to be working on. By separating out the behavior, like if I'm separating out the behavior in that sense as a trait, how do I ensure that the difference, but there are going to be differences in terms of objects properties as well. How do I take that into account?
Right, so that's where actually the required interface comes in, right? So in the classical way of inheritance or class-based modeling, what you do is you directly access the properties of an object and work on them in your methods. Over here, what you're forced to do is expose those properties through methods and not directly access them. And you can say that I want the including class to implement these methods, like maybe email or mobile number or whatever, which are the properties of the object that you want to work on. And you specify those in an interface that you create, right? And whenever you are including that particular trait in your class, the methods, the gem methods will check whether the including class has those methods. If they are not, it will give you an exception. You can go ahead and either create a derived class which exposes those properties via those methods, or if those already exist, if you have access to the code of the class, you can go and add those methods in. Just one word of caution: please don't open classes if you can avoid it. So rather inherit and add those methods rather than just opening classes that you have not written. There's one there. Vipul? Yeah, I'll repeat the question. Oh, my motivation, right. So a couple of years ago, I started learning Java 8 and Go at the same time, and I've actually found that the static typing in these languages makes my code a lot safer than my code in Ruby. A lot of times I find errors in my testing environments after sort of I've deployed to the testing environment, which really should have just been caught by compilers and like much earlier in the life cycle. And it wastes a lot of time of a lot of people. Also in my test suite, so I tend to work a lot on infrastructure code and methods that are long running. So whenever I was working on an object passed to me, I assume that the object, say, has 3 methods, out of which 2 get called immediately and 1 gets called, say, after 3 minutes of execution. And if that method doesn't exist, then I'm going to know only after 3 minutes that the object that has been passed to me does not actually satisfy the interface that I wanted to satisfy. So just saving my own time has been the motivation for wasting a lot of time on this. Spending, not wasting, sorry. Yeah, I think that's it. Right.
All right. Thank you, Aditya. So now we will have a tea break.